Hello and welcome to this week's review, and before I start, as per usual, downstairs in the description there are chapter headings if you want to skip bits of this video. What have we got for you this time around? Well, we have a pair of speakers, stand mount speakers from Technics. These are the SB-C600 passive speakers, priced at £999. Now, yeah, Technics, well, bias. Bias is a funny thing, isn't it? It colours opinion before you've even gained all of the facts. Now, it's a disease that runs rampant right across social media, mainly from lazy commentators, but it's an affliction that occasionally happens to the best of us. Mention Technics to me, for example, and I think of turntables. I don't think of amplifiers. Yes, I was shocked at just how good the Technics SU G700 M2 amplifier really was. Now that experience had me wary because when I think of Technics, I also don't think of speakers. And yet, here we are testing the SB-C600s. Once bitten? Now, while I'm musing upon such philosophy, I think we need to take a closer look. And welcome to the closer look section for the Technics SB-C600 speakers. And what you can see in front of you, well, rather plain looking speakers, but we'll get back to that aesthetic thing in a second. Definitely what you can see in front of you is 173mm by 293 by 283mm worth of speaker. So that's around 7 by 12 by 12 inches. These speakers also weigh in at a rather hefty 6.3 kilograms each, or 14 pounds. Now these are 4 ohm speakers, so if you're lucky enough to have 4 ohm sockets on your amplifier, use them. They also have a sensitivity of only 83 decibels, so you'll need a tow from a Land Rover to get them going. I would personally look at amplifiers pushing out 50 to 60 watts, probably nearer 60 watts actually, to get these things up and running. So actually thinking about recent reviews, the Audiolab 9000A amplifier, link above, that would be a pretty good choice, I reckon, in pure power terms at least. In design terms, well, one look at the front and you'll recognize the coaxial driver, which places the 25mm or 1-inch tweeter right in the center of the mid-bass driver. To best align and connect all those drives together, Technics has designed its own linear phase plug. Now, the plug itself is rather significant in terms of construction, and I'll be interested to hear if this thing gets in the way in sonic terms, but that's to come a bit later on. Now, the tweeter is made from aluminium, as is the 150mm or 6-inch mid-bass unit. Technics has gone to some effort to prevent the mid-bass output from being unduly perturbed by adding sloping edges to the drive and keeping the whole unit relatively shallow. That notion of the undisturbed can also be addressed to the design of the front-mounted bass port, which, says Technics, offers a narrow dispersal and smooth output. To help, the port is ribbed, which creates an almost rifle-like effect on escaping air to really focus that bass. And of course, I will listen out for those very things during the sound tests. Now, I have to add, when I removed these speakers from the box, I didn't think they looked like £1,000 worth of speakers. More like, what? Well, £400 maybe. picking them up, that made me think again. They felt very solid, rather heavy, rather dense. Placing these things on my stand and taking a closer, more considered view, that's when they started to look the part. But really, in aesthetic terms, the SB-C600s don't really scream quality, and I could see them being easily overlooked because of that. In fact, they look a little bit like a throwback to the 80s. But does the sound have a throwback sound too? Or, like the SU-G700 amplifier I mentioned earlier, will they surprise me? Let's take a listen and let's go to the sound quality tests. Welcome to the sound quality tests for the Technics SB-C600 speakers, and I chose the B-side from ex-Yardbirds lead singer Keith Relf and his debut solo single. This particular B-side is called Knowing. It's from 1966. I played it from the repertoire compilation All the Fallen Angels, solo recordings and collaborations 1965 to 1976. And I suppose you would call this a high-tempo ballad, draped in the psychedelia fervor of the day. The track features vocal, bass guitar, a finger-picking acoustic that acts as a rhythm guitar, an additional strummed acoustic to fatten out the sound, and an oboe, which adds that sort of filler sound that you might get from a string section. To begin, I did an A-B comparison with another very highly rated speaker, there or thereabouts in terms of price, from Martin Logan, the 15 Eyes. Now, I have a very high opinion of the 15 Eyes, so the Technics have an immediate and very tough challenge to even come close to this design. First impression, the Technics speakers, well, they need a shove to get going, so they were much harder to drive than the 15i speakers. So in terms of the Technics speakers, up went the gain. In terms of sound, well, I was right to expect another surprise from the Technics speakers because these speakers pushed up both of my eyebrows. 3 words sprang to mind immediately: cultured, tidy, and bass. Let's take the last point first. The SB-C600 speakers have one of the best bass responses I've heard for the price and for a cabinet of this size. There is a solid confidence in bass terms. Bass is quietly dense, deep and heavy. Bass digs trenches right across the soundstage, which is going some for a pair of stand mounts. Next, my second point, tidy. And indeed, yes, some speakers can be a little ragged, you might say, in terms of organizing the soundstage, but the SB-C600s offer precision in terms of imagery. There is a meticulous and clean presentation from these designs. You listen to these speakers and there is ne'er a hair out of place. The SB-C600s are almost OCD in terms of organization. And finally, cultured was my third point, wasn't it? Well, yeah, absolutely. Firstly, discipline is strong here, with all sonic frequencies behaving properly, with no nasty booming bass or pinching treble here. The bass may be strong and the imagery exciting, but there's an almost introverted aspect from the mids. These speakers, in mid-range terms, well, they're not showy. They are quietly efficient while exhibiting their sonic skills. They are not here to be flamboyant. The SB-C600s are, well, they're kind of studied, they're restrained, and I like that. In these terms, the SB-C600 sounded more impressive than the 15i speakers. Now, as I'm creating this video, I'm not long back from the Bristol Hi-Fi show here in the UK. In fact, well, it was last Friday as I make this video. And when I was there, I was fortunate to be on the end of a very late, in fact, Friday evening masterclass from Harbath Audio's legendary head designer, Alan Shaw. I went there to say hello as everybody was closing up. Most of the rooms were actually shut and locked, and Alan Shaw and his Harbath crew were still messing around with their speakers, and I popped in to say hello for 5 minutes, and I got an hour's lecture, which was incredibly valuable and very useful for this review. Because to distill Alan's masterclass of an hour into a few words, he basically said, when you're testing speakers, use speech. So, for the next stage in this review, speech. And for speech, I turned to the original BBC radio broadcast of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on CD from 1988, which, if you're a fan, sounds rather different in script and production terms to the studio version released originally on vinyl. And I have both, so I know. Now, it was here in speech terms that the 15i's showed their skill set, because although the SB-C600s offered a really nice performance, they couldn't quite match the lean and nimble vocal modulations from the Martin Logan tweeter, which is a folded motion tweeter. It looks like a ribbon tweeter, but it ain't. It's a folded motion tweeter. And the SB-C600s, well, although they sounded broadly balanced and broadly neutral, when compared specifically to the 15i speakers and that tweeter, the upper mids and the treble from the Technics sounded a little coloured during the speech testing. Now, that framework is perfect for music with energy, but it lacked a little extra measure of precision when compared, as I say, to the 15i's folded motion tweeter. But hey, that's dome tweeters for you. That's the dome tweeter performance on the Technics speaker. And that's the dome tweeter performance on just about every speaker using a dome tweeter. So what conclusions can you drag from that? Well, if you're a hardcore jazz fan, if all you listen to is classical music and that's it, then think seriously about a folded motion tweeter loaded speaker, or something similar like a ribbon tweeter speaker. Or if you have eclectic tastes, as I do. So I love my rock music. However, I do like vocal jazz, and I like electronica. I like finger-picking guitars. I do enjoy singer-songwriters, and on and on and on. Avant-garde stuff, pop stuff, and everything in between. But that's me. I would be looking, in my case, for something broader, something which, a pair of speakers that is, which addresses all of these things equally well. If you're going to go for something specialist, which is only aimed at jazz or only aimed at classical, yep, go for the folded motion tweeter from the 15i's. But if you have a more eclectic view on music, the Technics is actually the more impressive design here. Now, I came to this conclusion, as I say, thanks to Harbath's Alan Shaw. So, thank you, Alan. Okay, so how about comparing the Technics to another speaker design, which does have domed tweeters? So I brought in the Spendor A1s, which is slightly different from the Technics. It's not a coax design. It has a tweeter and a mid-bass unit, and it's a closed box, so no bass port. And I turned to vinyl and a spot of Mike Oldfield and the album Incantations, and a section of that album which majored on a treated glockenspiel. So you had a lot of upper mids and treble work going on there. There was electric guitar, also bass guitar, and in the background some sweeping synths. And well, the SB-C600s sounded absolutely lovely. The bass was pushed up a little more than the A1s at any rate, adding a much needed sense of tonal balance to this music, while the glockenspiel rung with a rich and almost romantic tone that was immensely appealing. This instrument had a distinct clarity that allowed the reverb to sweep around the soundstage, giving an impression of space and air that added to the rather magnificent performance. That inherent focus I mentioned earlier, the clean and tidy nature of the soundstage, that provided a sense of simplicity to the performance, which blended beautifully with the sheer skill from Mike Oldfield. And that's basically the review of these speakers. So how shall I conclude this review? Well, I'll give you a few closing thoughts, and I will do a few pros and cons, and I'll give you a rating. You know what? In many ways, these designs, these Technics speakers, they're almost a speaker version of the Audiolab 9000A. What I mean by that is firstly, they're good all-rounders. They might be beaten at this or that feature, but overall, looking at the bigger picture, they end up coming out on top. They offer a wonderful tonal balance that drowns you in impressive detail, swamping the ears with information, but doing so with a real sense of efficiency and style. The Technics SB-C600 speakers are also strong in bass terms and will beat you to a bass pulp if challenged, and all of this from a relatively small cabinet. Ideal if you're short on space or if floor standards are just too imposing in your listening room. Technics surprised me once again with the SB-C600 speakers. I have to say, when Technics released its Premier range, well, it wasn't kidding. The SB-C600 speakers are a worthy addition to that range and should be right up there if you're considering a pair of speakers at just under £1,000. Pros and cons. And in the good section, in design terms, we have a bass port on the front of the speakers, which means you can position these speakers pretty easily. You can push them up quite close to the wall if you need to. Bass. I was very happy with the bass extension, and that adds to the tonal balance. And while we're talking about the tonal balance, I really did like the balanced output from these speakers. Build quality, well, they may not shout at you in terms of pizzazz. They may not say, hey, look at me. They may be rather demure in terms of aesthetics, but they offer a solid build, and there's a quiet quality about these speakers. Finally, there's a heap of detail around the mid-range. There's lots of information there. You may find that you're listening to your records all over again because these speakers really dig deep and grab some subtle detail for your ears, but they do it in a neutral way. And in the bad section, absolutely nothing at all. Which means I will be giving these speakers, the Technics SB-C600s, an award-winning rating. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 groovy. Congratulations to Technics. And that's your lot, folks. Thank you very much for staying to the end of this video. And if you wouldn't mind clicking down below to help this channel to ride through the choppy algorithmic waters of YouTube, if you could possibly click on the like and subscribe buttons, it would cheer me up no end. Also, further down in the description, there's all kinds of links to my social media platforms, including my website, which has all kinds of stuff you won't find here. There is my Facebook group, and we talk hi-fi 24/7. It's a place that never stops. You can ask advice there. You're very welcome to throw in questions. For those who happen to be nice, polite, and kind, and civilized, then you'll have a whale of a time. There's also my Patreon page, all kinds of exclusive stuff over there. If you have a quick look, obviously in that direction, because I'm pointing there, hey, I can see it now. Then there's all kinds of buyer's guides, and there are hi-fi tour videos, and all kinds of other stuff. Check it out. Any help you can give me on Patreon funds this channel, so it's nice and circular, hey? I'll be back on Friday. I'll be back with hi-fi news, etc., with lots of other fiddly bits. I really don't know, as I'm talking to you now, what's going to be on there, because during the week, a secret evolution occurs where I suddenly think, I know, I'll do this, or something will pop through on the ether. So I ain't got a clue what the content, well, there'll be hi-fi news, of course. Anything else? I don't know. Any road off. That's it. I hopefully will see you on Friday, and if not, Sunday for another review. Until then, folks, bye-bye. Hang on, get the hand. Bye-bye for now.